going to be on for just a minute here. If anybody is watching at home right now through the webcast, this is the chance to leave there and go over to the Oak Bay website to get the link to the Zoom broadcast. We're not doing both. We're going to do the broadcast and later available through archives through the Zoom. So if you go to oakbay.ca/agendas, you will see the link there for the Zoom meeting, and you can watch uh, through that, and you can see all of our faces as we're speaking through that platform. So again, oakbay.ca/agendas, and with that, we are going to go back and here with the Zoom platform. And I believe we are, my clock here says we're ready to go. So with that, I will call the meeting to order. This is a special council meeting of May 7th, starting at 12:15. We are, of course, sitting in different places, but all gathered on the traditional territories of the Straits and Coast and Strait Salish peoples, known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. That the Lekwungen people, speaking people's connections to this land are continuing to this day. And of course, we are video streaming this through Zoom, and this broadcast will also be made available later for viewing. We have a fairly financial heavy agenda for us, and so I'll just get right to it. My mayor's remarks are fairly short tonight. I feel like I'm on Hollywood Squares, which dates me, I think, just even saying that name for a game show. I just want to let people know that if they are interested in sort of finding some other connections in the community, if you go to the connect.oakbay.ca site, there's a number of ways there of just sharing stories and sharing connections and just sort of communicating and connecting with other members of our great community. Want to just acknowledge all the work that's still going on through our Emergency Operations Center. We are still under a state of emergency. They've finished, last I checked, a little over 240 action items completed through that EOC. And are very busy trying to, again, adapt our operations to ensure our services stay up and running. And I just want to, again, acknowledge the great work done by the province at this point. Yesterday, as I'm sure you're aware, the province announced that we're going to be heading into phase 2 of the recovery. As they describe it, phase 1 is what we've been in right now, which is not shutting everything down, but having limited amounts of activities. And so phase 2 will open up a few more going forward. And I just, it's reflective as well as what staff have tried to do here and council over these last month, which is to try and keep as many services available and operating as possible. And we'll be sort of slowly turning things up as time goes on, as things are deemed to be safe under the guidance of the Public Health Office. And that's pretty much it for my comments. Thank you all for being here. We have the item number 2 on the agenda, which is the 2019 financial statements. And what I think we're going to do just procedurally here, so that I don't lose track of this, because I think there's going to be some discussion. If we can have the motion to start with, and then we'll have debates attached to that. Since most of these are actually going to be first and second reading and then debate, we'll just start off with that way on the first one. So if I could get a mover and a seconder to approve the financial statements, then we'll get into questions and debate. Moved and seconded. Thank you, Councillors Green and Braithwaite. So with that, I will also hand this over to Mr. Payne, who I believe is just going to do an overview of this agenda item before we get to any of the questions.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And before I begin, I just want to acknowledge the hard work put into the financial statements by the finance staff under the leadership of the Deputy Director of Finance, Donna Costin. So many late nights, and we're happy to present the financial results of 2019. The auditors are with us today from KPMG. Liette is on the line, and she's available to answer questions, as well as Julie, and they were kind enough to stick around with us through the audit this year. We're very pleased to have them there. We are not expecting them to provide a presentation this year. Their audit findings report is attached to the agenda, but they are available for questions. I'll run through the staff report in very brief detail. I always try to balance the curiosity and governance needs of council, and try to ensure it's succinct enough, but as well as informing and transparent enough. So ultimately, what the staff report attempts to accomplish is two things. We want to briefly discuss the audit findings, and council can come to its own opinion on audit findings, and also briefly discuss the financial results. So we're trying to bridge two things here: our requirement to report our financial statements in accordance with public sector accounting standards, and public sector accounting standards are slightly different than how council is used to seeing the budget format. So I attempt in my financial plan, or pardon me, in my financial results report to bridge those two things. So one key difference in the financial results is the inclusion of amortization, and often government organizations do not include amortization in the budgeting process. Amortization, if you're unfamiliar with that, is the financial cost, the yearly financial cost of our assets wearing out. And since it's not it's a non-cash item, it's not required to be budgeted for under the community charter. So often your financial plan will not include amortization, but public sector accounting standards require that we report amortization at the end of the year. So at first blush, it may appear that the district exceeds its spending authorizations in the financial plan, but that's not the case when you remove amortization. So we've included in the analysis portion of the report, we've identified where underspending has actually occurred to the tune of about $1.5 billion. And I would say that the reason for that is mostly because of the financial planning process previously didn't lend itself to getting going on capital projects and project and program spending early on the year. Often staff would wait to begin tendering projects until final budget was approved in May. However, we have changed that going forward, and we've really worked with council and the community to emphasize that when we prepare our financial plan, it is a 5-year plan, and staff are authorized to continue spending on that plan until that plan is amended or repealed and replaced in the next year. So in 2021, you'll find that staff are continuing to spend under the 2020 financial plan authority until the new financial plan is spent. And that really speeds up spending and program establishment. And I'll use a couple examples this year. We haven't officially adopted our financial plan bylaw this year, but there's already significant work underway. I'll use engineering as an example. There's already about $700,000 in pipe replacement that have been completed, and tenders gone out to the tune of $800,000 for pavement management. So those things are taking place under this new principle. So I think you will find next year capital spending and operating spending to be much more closer to budget, which means that staff are delivering on the services contemplated in the financial plan. The next thing I'll talk about real briefly is capital asset replacement. The 2019 financial plan provided for approximately $6.3 million in funding, and much of that was funding from reserves. The actual capital spending in 2019 was $3.5 billion, so the funds there remained within the reserves. Next, I'll talk just a little bit about the financial condition and how that has changed. The 2019 financial plan anticipated use of reserves, net use of reserves, to the tune of approximately $645,000. So that means that's the difference between transfers into reserves and transfers out to fund capital. We expected reserve balances to go down by $645,000. The financial results indicated increase of reserves by about $6.1 million. So that's a positive variance of $6.8 million into our reserves. And again, much of that was because of underspending in capital projects. And also there was a couple additional, like we received additional gas tax grant funding from the federal government. And so there was a couple positive revenue side of things. Now, as I mentioned, the auditors are required by the community charter to be appointed annually, and their role in the financial reporting process is really to express an opinion as to whether management's financial statements are true and correct in all material respects. Do they present fairly? Are we representing the results of our financial year accurately. And the the audit findings will suggest that's exactly the case. But there's a number of what the auditors have termed audit misstatements, which I'll discuss very briefly. In 2009, there was a new public sector accounting standard introduced for tangible capital assets, which required the district to report its assets at cost on its balance sheet, and every year amortize that and also record the increase and decrease in assets. Since that time, the district had not been capitalizing developer contributed assets, and that's because it's a non-cash transaction. So when developers want to develop a property, they're often required to upgrade infrastructure that surrounds that property and connect to already established district assets. And because that process is non-cash, it doesn't result in any financial transaction. This was missed, and there was a number of assets that weren't added to our inventory. So we've done a restatement to the tune of $972,000 to restate the prior year's balance of our contributed assets. And the reason why this is relatively significant is because we've really tuned up our focus on asset management at the district, and so we need to have an accurate inventory of all the assets under our control in order to properly plan. So the finance department has worked closely with the engineering department. We've developed a process now so that contributed assets are added annually and valued annually. So we're confident that will be clear moving forward. A number of other things to touch on in terms of misstatement. The MFA pooled investment funds management have valued our investments at market value, and currently public sector accounting standards require that it be valued at historical cost. But this accounting standard is changing so that the public at any given time can know what the market value of our investment funds are. So we've got sort of a head start on that. I'm going to talk just briefly about some of the internal control recommendations and policy improvements recommended by the auditors, which management agrees with. Throughout the year, some improvements were made. The year-end financial reporting software was tuned up significantly, and it reported quite useful in this year's financial statement preparation. You'll recall recently that council adopted a whistleblowing policy, which established really a good culture for timely resolution of conflicts within the organization. And management have also developed a financial information reporting timeline in the budget approach document. So that ensures that the leadership team and then council and the public has an opportunity to review timely financial information to gauge financial performance. Similarly, we've established the recognition of developer contributed assets to ensure that those assets get recorded at the end of the year. Other improvements that are recommended and will be taking place this year is a refresh of the expense reimbursement policy, which will be brought forward for council consideration at some point in 2020. And then an information technology policy, which will be presented to the Chief Administrative Officer as well sometimes in 2020. So thank you very much, Your Worship. As mentioned, the auditors are here and available for questions, and I, of course, am available for questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. And I will go to council at this time. Are there any questions of either Mr. Payne or of our auditors? And I saw Councillor Patterson's hand jump up there quickly, so I'll go to her. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak or have questions? I'll just start a queue. If I see any of the hands go up, I'll add you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, and thank you to the staff and the auditors for putting this together. I basically, as far as the financial statements go, most of my questions are clarifications. I don't have a problem with the statements as they are presented, but it comes back to just wanting some of the details. Mr. Payne talked about the developer contributor assets. That is something that myself and other members of the public asked about repeatedly over the years, because I did believe that it was a requirement under the Public Sector Accounting Board to report on that. And we were unsuccessful at getting that information. So I'm pleased to see that you are including it. And I know that it doesn't represent a significant number in these budgets, but my question is more related to good that the staff have identified this now and have remedied it going back for a series of years. What are the controls on that, though? Because we were not able to obtain that information before. So what are the controls? Could you explain perhaps the work at their Oak Bay assets that the developer, now does the developer do the work? Do district staff do the work? Where do the materials come from? If we could just get a little bit of an explanation on that.
Mr. Payne, I'll put that to you.
Yes, thank you. Developer contributed assets really refers to assets that have been built and financed directly by the developers. So it's not likely that many staffing resources are utilized in the construction of those assets. Mind you, the engineering department has to be involved to ensure the as-built are correct and give the go-ahead to actually connecting to our infrastructure. So there is a level of staff involvement, but those costs are borne in our regular engineering budget. So the assets themselves are constructed by the developers, and they provide information at the end of the stage to demonstrate to the district that they have connected to our infrastructure in a way that's acceptable to our engineering department. They provide that information. They provide the as-built, and the engineering department has been in custody of this information since time immemorial. So it was just about creating that bridge between finance and the engineering department. Now, in terms of controls to ensure that takes place in the future, we have an audit checklist that requires that this get addressed annually. So, it would be a glaring emptiness if it hadn't been done. And considering that developer contributions do happen every single year and have happened every single year since that I've been able to review, if there isn't a developer contribution amount in the financial statement, it should really stick out to auditors and to staff as well. And lastly, me and the director of engineering are talking about a process by which when we take custody of those assets, the developer hands over custody of it and also certifies the valuation that we have used for those assets. So a couple of things that we've done to ensure that shows up annually.
That's great. Thank you. If I can just continue, I'm also really pleased that the amortization is now shown on the financial statements. It's something that I more typically recognize and have always asked about, but it's really nice to have them there. But that will, around those questions, it brings me back to the net book value really of capital assets, something, again, I've asked questions about over the years. And so if we go to the statement of financial position, which is really the only statement I'm going to ask about with respect to the financial statements, and that's page 5 of the statements, page 6 of 31 if you're looking at the PDF. So on the tangible capital assets, for this to be fully transparent and a useful tool to, I think, to members of council, net book value is very important. In fact, the Auditor General of the province of BC says that a low tangible or net book value of tangible capital assets is basically a red flag for districts that action needs to be taken. And I think we are all familiar with that concept, especially now that we are looking at new ways to fund or plan on funding the asset management. But on the note on page 18 of the report, that's page 20 of 31 of the PDF, The 2019 net book value of tangible capital assets is 62.3 million versus a 2018 net book value of 62 million. So although we put about 3 million in, the net book value increased approximately only 1.36 million. And I think Mr. Payne has done a good job at explaining that. And it's because of the amortization. So we do write-offs, and so we don't get a total net gain. But in order to understand the net book value, you have to really understand also what the value of the replacement of those assets would be. And so if I look at the tangible capital assets note on page 18, for the roads, sewers, and drains and water lines, the book value is 35.7. And although it's a significant improvement over certainly prior years, it still reflects a significantly low net book value to replacement value for those assets, if I'm to understand correctly the OCP and the OPIS reports. The OCP, which was based on a 2009 replacement cost value, was 128 million, and the OPIS consulting report values those same assets, replacement value of those assets, at 265 million. So we've got and the reserves that are represented in the accumulated surplus are 22 million. So we've got a gap of anywhere between 150 and 200 million just for that portion of the capital assets. So that, in my mind, represents a very low net book value relative to replacement value. And then based on what we have looked at provided by staff in the financial plan versus these financial statements, it would lead me in taking all of these numbers to conclude that our sustainable financial model that we're using is in basically probably a 25-year plan for replacing them. And so if I look at these statements, how do I come back to the calculation of the sustainable finance modeling that is in our financial plan, which has us going up to 10 million a year to replace just even this portion of the assets at 200 million, without understanding how the assets are, if we either apply future value calculations to the value of the assets, or we do present value calculations of the cash flow as we're projecting it out in years going forward. It's very difficult to understand how we're coming up with the number of 10 million and calling it sustainable asset funding. So
I just want to make sure I've got a clear question for staff to answer here on this one. Are you asking about where that $10 million comes from, or are you asking some of the other?
Well, if the 10 million, if I look at this, we are on this statement, we have basically our cost value, our historical cost value of the assets. Mr. Payne has now included the amortization, so that's great. We can see where that stands from. But the statement, if we want to be fully transparent about the assets and understand whether our net book value relative to what we're facing is a realistic plan, you have to understand what the replacement value of the assets are, not just the historical cost value that is on this statement.
Mr. Payne, do you want to address the question of Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, through your worship. Councillor Patterson makes a really good point. You know, we're required by public sector accounting standards to record those assets at cost, but frankly, many of those assets are 50, 60 years old. So the cost value used in the financial statements are not indicative whatsoever of what the replacement costs are going to be. And these standards were put in place so that they could provide a clue to those charged with governance as to what the condition of our assets and funding for those assets were. And Councillor Patterson has very keenly picked up on those clues in the financial statement. But what I think is being asked, and I would 100% agree, is I believe council and the community really needs to know what is the replacement cost of all our assets? How, and when are we going to have to pay those replacement costs? So if our estimates are right with respect to road, sewer, and drainage, and they're over $200 million right now, okay, so they're worth over $200 million to be replaced, but that doesn't mean they have to be replaced right now. So if we set aside $10 million, will we build up enough reserves so that as we slowly replace the entire system, we won't go into debt? And that question has to be answered with additional analysis that staff absolutely are taking seriously. The $10 million figure that we came up with was essentially that. It was a estimate of what's the market value, what's the replacement cost of all of our assets right now divided by their useful life. Well, we should be setting aside $10 million. In general, one of the rule of thumbs that I tend to use, and I'm just gonna share my screen real briefly. I won't belabor this point. There we go. Can everyone see the financial statements, the very exciting financial statements in front of them? What we generally like to use as a rule of thumb for replacement costs. Replacement costs can be anywhere between 2 and 4 times the net book value. The amortization that you experience, $2.3 million, what you should be setting aside is 2 to 4 times the size of that. And that comes pretty close to $10 million. And the reason being, the assumption here is that if costs were not inflated whatsoever, that we were replacing assets at the exact same price we bought them for, we would have to be setting aside amortization every year so that we don't go negative in our reserves. But since costs go up, and the useful life of these assets are so long, they usually go up 3 to 4 times by the time we replace it. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, Councillor Patterson, that work is absolutely underway. We plan to put together an infrastructure replacement plan that demonstrates the replacement cost of all our assets at current value and when that will occur, so that we can plan to build up our reserves adequately and so that they can fall adequately in periods of extreme capital expenditure as well. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. That, that was partly the answer I'm hoping for, because I do think we need to, we have to have different ways of modeling this. And it's very difficult if we are looking at a financial plan and then the financial statements, and later there will be the annual report. And you really have to kind of work circular through them all to, in fact, figure this out. But it was, in fact, the statement of financial position that first gave me concern when I read the OCP and the valuations, and I looked at the statements of financial position back in 2010, I guess it was. Now, on the statement also, when we've looked at what is required for funding, and we're putting money in reserves, and I know when we did the financial plan, the staff also advised it's good to put in reserves. I agree on that partially, because it does give you better buying power if you have if you actually have cash to do work. But if I look at the deferred revenue note on page 14, so that should be about page 15 of 31. If I look at the deferred revenue, and that was the amount set aside for the Upland Sewer Separation Project, that was the accrued revenue from gas taxes that contributed to that. The now determined valuation of what that project is going to actually cost us significantly has increased over the very low percentage of the interest that is being earned on those funds. So again, this statement demonstrates that while putting money into reserves is a good thing to do, it is not necessarily the only option to be looked at when actually the cost of labor and materials is quickly exceeding what the very low interest rate is. And so in a climate of low interest rates, is it a better model to be taxing when we are going to be perhaps not creating new assets that are of benefit to the taxpayers for perhaps 25 years down the road, as opposed to borrowing? And we have very low debt, of course, on these financial statements. So how do the staff, district staff, use these statements to judge those things?
Mr. Payne, go ahead. You can go ahead and answer that. And I just want to be careful here a little bit that we don't drift too far into forward-looking, which is the financial plan, versus the backward-looking, which is the financial report. But it's germane either way in this case, so
Yeah.
I'll certainly allow the question, no problem. Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship. And again, I'll just briefly share my screen so I can show the audience the financial statement note that Councillor Patterson is referring to, and this is deferred revenue, this gas tax amount here. And to put it another way, Councillor Patterson, I believe that a case could be made that the cost of deferred maintenance exceeds the benefits of deferred maintenance, because, as you correctly pointed out, if the cost of replacing an asset or building an asset goes up faster than the interest you earn on money in the bank, then you're costing your taxpayer money. And a case could certainly be made here, because the cost for the upland sewer separation, which what this money is dedicated for, have grown at a faster pace than we've earned in our interest. So absolutely correct. Now, incidentally, we're kind of hoping that we get a grant for this project, and our portion of the project would be about $6.2 million. So that would fit nicely. But absent of that, it wouldn't be inappropriate for council to consider taking on debt, building it, so you can avoid the cost escalation that's underway, and save taxpayer money, rather than keeping the money in the bank and earning less than what the cost escalation is. I hope that answers your questions in entirety. Let me know.
Yeah, no, I think that that is certainly information I'm looking for, and it is very difficult because, as our mayor has pointed out, I'm trying to focus on the financial statements. However, without tying the financial plan to the financial statements and eventually to the annual report, it's difficult to put the whole picture together. For this presentation, of course, it is a good, I think, a clearer representation than previous years as to where we stand on that given year. But as is pointed out in the staff report, the Director of Finance's report on this, we have embarked on a new undertaking with really an authorization by council to fund the entire 5-year capital plan. And in order to understand our achievement, our successes on a go-forward basis, this only gives us a 1-year snapshot of it. When then will we see, and even the financial plan only had the previous year and a current year. So when do we see, or where will we see the performance indicators against the 5-year goals? Because for this council, we actually started in 2018. So we've already lost, we already have not captured the information from there and what we plan to do and how it'll go through to the end of the council's term. How will we, in what report will we get those indicators?
So give that to Mr. Payne. So this really is a question of, what point how do we capture sort of some of the longer term, planning pieces? Some of that's in the financial plan, obviously, and in the longer term financial reporting. Are there mechanisms for that in any of the sort of standardized reporting models that we have.
Through your worship, I think right now the performance indicators that council may be looking for are they're piecemeal. So yes, we do our financial statements. They compare they compare to last year. Our financial plan is forward looking for 5 years, but there's no reporting mechanism to look back five years as it stands. So you kind of have to piece together a number of those years. So staff will, I'm going to have to take that into consideration if I may, Councillor Patterson. But that's a good point, is that, you know, council was elected, was a certain mandate. You produced a strategic plan. I know the Director of Strategic Initiatives has developed an excellent council priorities reporting process, as well as a strategic plan progress report. And hopefully the scope of the KPIs in those will be long enough to really demonstrate whether council has achieved those and at what pace.
Great. And if Mr. Payne would do a little more crystal balling on this for me, because under the new model, council has authorized expenditures over a 5-year plan. Some of these, and there's a good rationale for doing that, because some projects, it's very difficult to complete larger projects all in 1 year, and depending on weather and timing and all of those things, obviously there's a very solid rationale for allowing it to span year end. For future financial statements like this, when a project actually spans more than 1 year, how is it represented how will it be represented in the financial statements going forward?
Sorry, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. So again, I will attempt, and in greater detail, I believe, next year, to really bridge the financial plan and the financial statement report. So in terms of financial statements, we're really not required under PSAB to report out the individual projects, but that's of keen interest to the community and to councils. How did we do with those particular projects that were in the financial plan? So what I attempt to do is prepare, as you've seen in the appendix of this report, how does it look compared to the financial plan that we set out? And it would include more details going forward. So the schedules of projects, the actual operating budgets per department would be there, so that council could really look at the performance on a project basis.
And is the amortization of a project, does that commence in municipal governments? Does the amortization of project commence at the conclusion of the project, or a segment of a project? How is that determined?
So if I understand your question correctly, Councillor Patterson, when a piece of capital is constructed or acquired, amortization commences in the year following in which that construction occurs. Yeah.
Right, thank you. So that's kind of it for the statements. A couple of questions just on how we get to this. When we do our budgeting, do we use zero-based budgeting in the District of Oak Bay, or what's the basis for how our budgets are built?
I'll give that to Mr. Payne to answer.
Thank you, Your Worship. We use a blended model for budgeting when it comes to our financial plan. So we definitely use elements of zero-based budgeting throughout. And I would suspect that the majority of our budget is developed using zero-based. So for those that don't know that term, it basically means, do we look at budgets and build it from the ground up every single year? Or do we just simply add 2% to the budget and move on? That's the general understanding what zero-based is. So we zero-base a number of things, including staffing, which is a huge component of our budget, special projects, capital projects, and most contracted services are also zero-based. But there are some things that just get a general inflationary factor applied to it, which would include materials and supplies, travel, professional development. Even though we apply an inflationary factor annually, we look at those to see if they continue to be adequate or too much every year.
And one final question I have, and then I'll turn it over to other members of council. But it's raised in the Director of Finance's report, and I think appropriately so, that there were some difficulties last year in the reporting due to vacancy of staff. In fact, the role that Mr. Payne has filled with the district. And so that is a flag, I think, of risk in financial controls and reporting, which becomes more, I think, more concerning if we are as council authorizing a 5-year plan expenditure rather than just a single year. And if somebody, perhaps, probably not Mr. Payne, but another member of staff, if we could just touch on plans underway or mitigation strategies underway, so that we are a small community with limited staffing resources, but our financial department is absolutely critical, particularly because so much of what this council strategy is about is asset management and financial long-term sustainability. So hopefully Mr. Payne is going to be with us for quite some time to come. And the great work that the whole department, including Mr. Payne, is doing will continue. But what about that risk that we face?
I actually honestly don't know where to put that question, perhaps to Ms. Varela, in terms of some of the overarching, risk mitigation, risk management questions around staffing is probably the best person to go to. Ms. Varela, are you able to touch on sort of the process used for these sort of recognizing the risk and the redundancies?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I think this relates to Council's strategic priority of service excellence and the improvements that staff have committed to achieving for this organization and the community. So we know that there are significant milestones that we're looking to achieve with our human resource planning, of which staffing is one key component. I think we've made some great strides in getting the right people into the right key positions in the organization, and that's your first step. I think we still have a few more vacancies that we have to fill that we've talked about to support engineering as we see that workload expand, and corporate services as we see that workload expand as we get systems, processes in place. And that planning for staffing is a key piece of that, and it's well recognized. So I would say it's on the radar, and just like our asset management and the pieces of the puzzle that we're working to get in place so council can consider that in a more fulsome way, we're taking the same approach with staffing.
Mm-hmm. Will some of the upgrades or implementation of new software, financial or perhaps facilities management software, will that also mitigate some of the risk on a go-forward basis?
I'll give that to Mr. Payne here, I think, a little bit, just in terms of, obviously, the better our systems are, better our financial systems are, the easier it is to transition. But Mr. Payne, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, Your Worship, and a good question. I think you will find that the majority of our financial policies will be updated within the next year to 2 years. A number of them have already been updated, and that establishes a really modern approach to the financial processes at the district. And so, I mean, first of all, Ms. Varela treats me very nice. I'm very, very happy in the position, but suggesting that, if financial leadership were to move along, the next person would be advantaged because there would be a number of current and modern financial policies that they can pick up and go. So yeah, that would be my answer to that.
Thank you, Mr. Payne.
Thank you. I think that concludes my questions, and I thank Mr. Payne and Ms. Varela for their commentary on that, and also to the staff for getting essentially with some minor adjustments a clean audit. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. And that's a good reminder to anybody, if you have questions of the auditor as well in the audit report, this is the appropriate time to raise those questions as well. Are there any other questions from members of council? Oh, Councillor Appleton, and then Councillor Green.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very briefly, through you to staff, I just wanted to ask a quick question regarding the Appendix 1 that's attached to the report from the Director of Financial Services, just referring to the reduction in expenses due to recoverable services. And so I was just for my own edification and for those listening in the public, just to detail what recoverable services references.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Payne?
Yes, thank you. Through your worship, I would describe the most cost recovery work that we do includes sewer connections, so new sewer connections, storm drain, water driveways. So we perform those based on a user fee basis. People have to pay to have that done, and that's what we're referring to there.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Appleton? No. Councillor Green?
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to Mr. Payne. And Mr. Payne, thank you very much for this report, and I really appreciate its complexity. Just an overall question, and you did reference it in the report, but for clarity for the public and for ourselves, what are some of the concerns, issues, or priorities that you are now focused on in the wake of COVID-19 and recovery planning? Just briefly. Thank you very much.
Mr. Payne, I have to get used to hitting the unmute button when I speak here. Mr. Payne, do you have any overviews of what's some of the work going on?
If I may, Your Worship, answer from a strictly financial perspective, because there's certainly that question could be answered much more broadly by our CAO or the rest of the team here. But from a financial perspective, COVID-19 has put a lot of stress on our revenues. And so the financial plan going forward from council direction has allocated some surplus from the 2019 financial statements to help offset those what we hope is temporary decline in revenues. And that's really something that we're keeping a close eye on right now.
Councillor Green, is that sufficient?
Yes, thank you very much. And I appreciate that it is a much broader question, and I meant to focus it on financial planning going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Any other questions at this time? I don't see any. I just for my own clarification, because it was raised a couple of times through Councillor Patterson, we have been making an effort to allow us to move our capital projects forward earlier in the year for all kinds of good reasons. Perhaps, Mr. Payne, can you articulate what gets approved in the 5-year plan and what still comes back annually for approval on the annual financial plan basis?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's the financial plan provides authorization for spending for council for the full 5-year timeframe that it is. The annual process by which we adopt a new financial plan really can be viewed as a refinement of that plan. So it should be a continuation, but a refinement of that plan. And if that's how a council treats it, then staff are really empowered to continue spending, especially in the subsequent year. So year 2 of the financial plan, as the refinement discussions occur. So you'll notice that during the financial plan presentation, staff mentioned a couple times, if you're approving this, council, please be aware you're also approving 2020 or 2021, and staff come January 1st, 2021, will continue with the spending that was approved in the 2020 year and the 2021 year. We're just going to continue spending until we receive alternate direction from council. And alternate direction really is a new financial plan. And if council and the community is really serious about what they're approving in that 5-year plan, it's not an issue. It's just we're refining the financial plan based on new estimates, new information, and new priorities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. And I think it's really important for the public, anybody watching this, to understand The rationale for this is it allows us to get out earlier, get earlier in the bidding process for capital projects, to look at multi-year projects without having to go through the complexity of waiting until May of the year of for projects the following year. And there's lots of good reasons for trying to get into that mindset. And this is a shift philosophically for the organization, but I think it's a very needed one. And so I think the questions that Councillor Patterson had around some of the I am muted for some reason. Can you hear me now? There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. I won't say too much. I was just saying that the am I back again? I think I have a little remote on my thing that my sleeve was bumping and turning myself off there. I think what was happening there. I was just saying that the five-year planning process is very important for us to get for cost reduction of our capital projects, for having these longer term vision for things. But I think Councillor Patterson's point is a good one. It's an important shift for us to be making philosophically as an organization, but it's also important for us to have that reporting structure attached to that as well, so that we're thinking that way both in our planning and in our reporting model. So thank you for raising that, Councillor Patterson. I think that was really good. Did I see another hand pop up here? Did not. Okay, so we have a motion on the table to approve the financial statements. I believe after this, the auditor is leaving the meeting. Is that correct, Mr. Payne? Yes, I'm getting a nod here in the room. So if there's any other questions of the auditor, I'm not seeing any, then we will, Councillor Zelka. You have to,
there we go. Now I'm unmuted. Thank you very much. I'll take the advantage of having the auditor here, and thanks to staff, thanks to the auditors. I'm very pleased to see it's a clean audit and with minimal misstatements or restatements. I wanted to ask a question through. I noticed other districts that possibly KPMG does audits for have, for example, finance committees or executive type committees to assist with this management review and to assist our director of finance. I was wondering if the auditor could possibly share with us whether it would help with respect to the risk management or with some other aspects of our auditing statements going forward, whether some sort of a management or finance management committee could assist with something like that, or whether it would be helpful.
Sure, thank you, and I'll put that question. I just want to point out the expectations are set not to be commenting particularly on our situation necessarily, which you probably don't have the knowledge of our internal operations enough to know whether it's a good or bad idea, but just in terms of maybe how those are used in other jurisdictions and what they bring to the table.
Yes, and its impact on risk management, since that's mentioned in the audit report.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So yeah, I think there is value in having a audit committee to sort of have a terms of reference set, which includes the receiving and review of the reports from the auditor and the review of the financial statements to get them to a place to recommend approval by council. So in larger public sector organizations, this is definitely the case where there is a separate audit committee that carries this task. When you're talking about risk management, often one of the responsibilities included in the audit committee terms of reference is related to enterprise risk management or risk management in general. How it might work in your context would be striking a sort of a subcommittee of council, preferably with those interested in, or with a background in financial information, to give you the expertise on that committee to appropriately do the task of reviewing the audit findings and financial statements.
Okay, thank you. And it's Ms. Bates-Emer, is that right? That we have on
Yes,
with us today? Okay.
yes, and I'm on here twice. My colleague Julie is on here under my my identity down below there.
Okay, great. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Councillor Zelka, did you have any follow-up questions for that?
No, that was satisfactory, and thank you so much for the information. Much appreciated.
Thank you. I'm seeing no other questions. We have a motion on the table to approve the financial statements as laid out here, and including the audit findings report. Is with that, no other questions. I will call the question. All those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for that and for the detailed questions that we got to get through. We are now moving on to our non-financial item, which is just new business and verbal reports. So under new business, this would be a chance for any updates, notices, emotions type things. Are there any, Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Mayor. And just I did ask quite a few questions, of course, about the financials, and I appreciate everybody's patience. I know that not all members of council are quite into the same discussions around net book values and those types of things as I am, but that's fine because they bring certainly other wisdoms to the table and expertise that I don't have. But following up on something Councillor Zelka already talked about, I just think that we are making many changes to how we're doing finances. Most of them I think are positive steps forward and we all support. But I would like to, at this time, just say that I will actually be bringing forward a notice of motion to establish a finance committee. And basically, I've done something in draft just so that I can introduce it, saying, whereas Council authorized significant change in district financial planning by authorizing spending for a 5-year time frame commencing January 2020 and continuing through 2024. And whereas Section 142 of the Community Charter gives Council the opportunity and authority to establish and appoint a select committee to consider or inquire into any matters and to report back on its findings. And whereas such select committee would afford Council with an opportunity to tap into residents' expertise on financial matters while acknowledging powers, duties, and functions conferred to the district's financial officer in Section 149 of the Community Charter. Therefore, be it resolved to direct staff to take the necessary steps to establish a financial governance and oversight committee to support the district's ongoing efforts to ensure long-term financial sustainability and transparency. So I will, of course, pass this on to staff and to have their comments back and bring it forward to Council again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson, for the notice, and the final wording of that will come to Council, obviously, when it gets brought forward. Do encourage you to speak with staff, and we can chat as well, just about what the intention of the goal is out of that, to make sure that if we're bringing it forward, that we're very clear in terms of what that looks like. Any other new business? Not seeing any. I don't have any real report on the Capital Regional District. Our meetings have been suspended. We've been getting updates from the Emergency Operations Center, but the last meeting we had was just it's similar to this in terms of formalizing the financial plans as required under the law. So that's all been completed at this time. I know not many of us are meeting with our external committees and commissions and things, but are there any updates? I have Councillor Green and Councillor Patterson, Councillor Braithwaite, and Councillor Appleton. Okay, thank you. So Green, Patterson, Braithwaite, Appleton.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Just to bring to everybody's attention, I'm stating the obvious, but my two committees within the community are the BIA, the Business Improvement Association, and the Tourism Committee. And these two areas these two bodies represent the two areas that are being hit very hard with this pandemic and COVID-19 response. I don't know how many businesses exactly are affected on Oak Bay Avenue. I know we've lost Just Matcha. I also know that I think the other business that is very concerned about surviving is Karma Design on the corner of Foul Bay and Oak Bay Avenue. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, is there something that we can do as sort of a supportive thing very similar to the hearts and the thank yous and all of those for frontline health workers and so on. I know it sounds maybe odd, but I would defer this to our events planning person, Councillor Braithwaite, but is there something we could do together, senior staff and council perhaps, fire chief, police chief, that we march down the avenue and acknowledge how important these small businesses are to all of us, and tourism included. I haven't discussed this with the BIA or the tourism committee, but I thought I would run it by ourselves first and see if people are keen to perhaps be involved in some acknowledgement event. What that looks like exactly, I don't know, but that would require all of us, thinking about it. But that's my concern. I'm very concerned about the future of both of those sectors in our community, of course, and more broadly across the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Obviously, gatherings are always hard, especially right now with the limits, but the certainly events or activities that can promote that, I think, would be really welcome. I know it's all of us individually can do a lot to just remind people to shop locally and to do that ourselves. And I would, suggest that the new connect.oakbay.ca place may be another place to share ideas as well. If anybody from the community wishes to support or has ideas for doing that, that would be another good place that people can share that, as well, of course, through social media programs. But this is not, unfortunately, the format to have a debate or discussion on it. But I think just raising it here is a really excellent point, Councillor Green, because it raises the awareness and allows for maybe some offline suggestions from staff or from councillors as to how we might be able to help support the businesses more forcefully, more clearly. Thank you.
Perhaps I could speak with Councillor Braithwaite offline, and we can talk about something
That'd be great.
that wouldn't involve more than, is it 6 people now or 50? I can't remember, but
The
even
gatherings,
6 of us.
yeah.
Yeah, even 6 of us could be involved. Anyway, I'll speak with Councillor Braithwaite. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Braithwaite, speaking of the devil, here we go.
I thought someone else was before me, weren't they?
I have you. Oh,
Okay.
Just go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite, and then
Okay.
we'll go to Councillor
I'll be
Patterson.
very, very quick. 2 things. Number one, yes, Councillor Green, we did talk about this actually. I think you had to miss the last tourism meeting, so I was there in your stead as I'm the alternate. And they did talk about doing something of a dinner, so we will talk about that. I just wanted to give an update on AVICC. So for those people that are listening, AVICC stands for the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities, and I'm a director on that committee. We obviously did not have our AVICC convention this year, which meant that we didn't have an AGM and election of the officers. So they're looking at a way to perhaps do something like that online or update our members online, or perhaps doing something at UBCM if UBCM goes forward this year. So that's the update on AVICC. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Then I have Councillor Patterson, then Appleton, and then Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor. And just, I can advise that Zoom meetings are, I guess, becoming the new normal, but the CREST AGM Zoom meeting will be scheduled for May 20th. So we will be managing that. And with the size of the board, it'll be quite interesting to see how we communicate on that. I also just wanted to advise that the Heritage Foundation is doing electronic correspondence in meetings, and we're trying to work around that, and I think doing a very good job at continuing the inclusive feeling of the membership on the foundation, and also able to continue with review and approval of grant applications for work on heritage properties. One was just approved this previous week. So we are continuing to find our way through this new operational format of teleconferencing or Zoom meetings and whatnot. But at least we are allowing the work to continue to go forward, because it's very important with the good weather upon us to get work grants out for things like painting. Thank you.
The Councillor Appleton and then Councillor Zelka.
Or thank you, Your Worship. Reporting back to council just in my capacity as Oak Bay's Library Board trustee, council may have been aware or may have seen that a couple of days ago a press release was issued on behalf of the library of the GVPL, communicating a decision made by the GVPL board, an extremely difficult decision made by the board to lay off a number of employees who had been on paid leave. So that constituted 51 auxiliary and 117 regular employees that had been on leave since the branches closed on March the 16th. It is, as you can imagine, you can appreciate, a very difficult decision on behalf of the board. It is the board's hope as we determine how the way forward for reopening library branches, that some of those staff may be able to be re-engaged before that layoff advisement period passes. As council can also appreciate, that's very much up in the air. To the library remains open in digital format, but obviously the congregation of people and the management of the physical materials is a very difficult thing to get on top of, or a very difficult thing to plan for. So there are many unknowns in that. But if council was not already aware that that decision had been made, that is where we are at now. And there has been no modification to the budget at this time, because as council can also appreciate, there are many unknowns as far as what will be required to get the branches open and running. So that's really where we're at right now. And if council has any questions, I can answer them as best I can.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. So of the committees that I and commissions that I liaise with, I'll start with the emergency Oak Bay Emergency Program. I'm just very pleased to report that I'm sure all of you already know that this week is National Emergency Preparedness Week from May 3rd to May 9th. So in whatever social distance way you can, hug an emergency preparedness person, please. I wish I could provide donuts to the EOC, our Oak Bay EOC, which is currently activated. I won't provide any further information because our emergency operations center has already made it abundantly clear through Twitter and through the excellent material available on our website, all the information that's needed for emergency preparedness at this time. So sincere thanks to everyone who is actively working on keeping us all safe at this time. I also wanted to share, just with respect to the Water Commission, we're not meeting at this time. However, Water Commission staff are working closely with CRD staff, of course, to ensure that our water keeps flowing. And I think the latest thing is that they're making sure that they've got good water operations staff, well-trained, extra staff trained just in case there happens to be staff shortages. So things are being done in place all over, mitigation is being done all over to make sure that we have the essential services that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Anyone else with any verbal reports at this time? Not seeing any, so we'll move on with the agenda to item number 4, which is bylaw number 4752, Financial Plan Bylaw 2020. Mr. Payne, do you want to just give an introduction of this? So we're just,
Thank
there
you.
we go.
I was just pretending to be the mayor for a moment there. Thank you, Your Worship. The financial plan bylaw has been prepared based on council direction of March 12th and subsequent direction from council. That subsequent direction includes allocation of the 2019 surplus. So we've allocated most of that to contingency and some of it to some revenue that we expect to fall. In addition, the financial plan bylaw includes amortization, which has not historically been included in there, but it will make our financial statements more comparable in 2020 when the financial statements come forward. As well, the small communities grant amount has been upgraded. The manager of infrastructure and facilities funding has been moved and deferred to 2021, and the new development taxation revenue has been taken in to offset the tax increase. So the financial plan bylaw represents a 6.9% tax increase. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Just again, procedurally, if we can get first and second, we can do first and second reading together. If that's moved and seconded, then we can have discussion and questions. Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by a bunch. So thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Payne or any comments? I'll take both since it's on the table now. Not seeing any, so we have first and second movement made. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And none opposed, is that right? Okay, got no hands up. Thank you for that. And then I need third reading. Moved and seconded, thank you. Councillor Green and Braithwaite. Don't usually have debate on third reading, but I'll take it if anybody has anything to add. Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, thank you. And then move adoption. Moved by Green, seconded by Zelka. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. That passes. We are on to bylaw 4753, tax rates bylaw 2020. Mr. Payne, do a quick overview of the tax rates bylaw.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. This bylaw imposes rates on all taxable land and improvement. It also imposes tax rates for the Capital Regional Housing District and the Capital Regional District. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I get a move first and second reading? Moved and seconded, thank you. Are there any questions or discussion on this? The only question I have, Mr. Payne, the rates that are set for the hospitals in particular, are those set by us? Because I just noticed that they're the only ones that don't have a higher ratio for farm in Oak Bay. They tend to follow the more traditional piece of matching it to a lower rate. Is that something that we set, or is it something that's set by the hospital system elsewhere?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we set the rates, but the ratios are legislated and regulated.
Okay, that's interesting. So if they can't change that one piece, that's okay. Thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Green.
Thank you. I just have two questions for our Director of Finance on items 3 and 4, which is one of them is the Boulevard Frontage Tax Bylaw, the other is refuse collection and disposal. And just my questions are just to ask for clarification for the public through you, Mayor, to Mr. Payne. Could he give us examples of, in the case of item 3, what the increased expenditures look like for Parks, Rec, and Culture, and then in item 4, what providing enhanced service looks like, increased cost of providing service consistent for engineering and public works, just so the public has an idea of what those examples might be in terms of enhancement. Thank you.
Yes, I think I can do that. You're referring to the staff report here, the numbers 1, 2, and 3. Is that your?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes, the
Okay.
staff report, page 2 of 2.
Yes,
Thank
perfect.
you.
So we're on I'll actually take your question separately. I'll do the tax rate question now, and then we'll get to the frontage question after. Mr. Payne? Or if you want to answer them all now, you can do that as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Boulevard Tax Bylaw is actually next on the agenda, so perhaps that question could be answered then.
But yeah, that's satisfactory, Councillor Green? I got
Yes, that's yeah. No, that's yeah. I sometimes I don't know whether to raise a hand or demute, but yes, no, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. So we'll deal with that then. So then we have first and second reading of the tax rates bylaw in front of us. Any other discussion? We have motion on the table. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Can I get a motion for third reading? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. And then adoption. Is there a mover and a seconder? Thank you. And all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. We are moving on to item number 6 on the agenda. This is the Boulevard Frontage Tax Bylaw Amendment. So, Mr. Payne, you can introduce it and perhaps answer Councillor Green's question at the same time.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. This is the frontage tax for that's levied on a number of properties that are subject to the boulevard maintenance conducted by the city. Now, not all boulevards that are maintained by the city are directly in front of residents, and so only approximately 75% of the cost of maintaining our boulevards is recovered through this tax. And again, it's designed to tax those that benefit from that boulevard maintenance. This year in the financial plan, the boulevard maintenance line item was expected to increase by approximately 3.2%, which correlates closely to the increase in the taxation.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Is there any follow-up questions, Councillor Green? Actually, I'll get again. Let's get moved first and second to get this on the table for discussion. Is there a mover and a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. So it's live on the table now. Were there additional questions, Councillor Green? Any additional questions?
No, I really appreciate the clarification. It was really for the public so that they understood why the increase. Thank you.
It's a question every year that comes up from the public, so I appreciate you asking it just for that clarification. Any other comments or questions at this time? I'm not seeing any, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Move third reading. Hand. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. And we have get a move adoption, please. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. We have item number 7, bylaw 4755, refuse collection and disposal bylaw amendment. Mr. Payne, do you want to do a quick introduction of this?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The solid waste charge is designed to fully recover the cost of providing the solid waste service. Last year, an increase did not occur, which is why this year an increase of 3.9% was included. But furthermore, the solid waste services went up by approximately 3.6% this year. That was mainly as a result of the contract, a significant contract we have there that went up about 15%. And that was because of the labor market at the time was very difficult to get employees, so they had to really increase their labor costs. That is going out for tender later on this year, but those are the driving reasons why the increase of 3.6%. The aim and objective of the district is to continue to increase this fee in line with the cost of providing the service. Otherwise, we'll get into a situation where tax revenue is being used to subsidize the cost of the service, which is something that council can choose to do, but that's not the case at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Can we just get a mover and a seconder for first and second reading? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments, Councillor Zelka?
Thank you very much, Chair. Question through you to staff. I just would like some clarification regarding this. Does this include the service to collect recycling? And when you talk about the it coming back up for tender, with the whole aspect of kitchen scraps and the recycling aspect, will that also be coming up for tender? Is that part of this? Just some clarification, please.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for that question, Councillor Zelka, because it often is a point of confusion with the public, and I'm happy to take this opportunity to clarify. The CRD is the one who contracts for Blue Bin Recycling, and I believe that they contract, I could be wrong, but I believe they contract through Mterra, who happens to be our organics provider. So really, we're not responsible for the cost of the Blue Box, and we're not responsible for that contract administration. The Blue Box program itself, I believe, is funded through fees paid at Heartland Landfill. Our solid waste includes just general solid waste garbage, and as well as organics pickup. And it was the organics contract that went up significantly this year.
Thank you, Mr. Payne, for that clarification. And thanks for the question, Councillor Zelka. Any
And if I may
follow-up?
follow up, yes,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Can I just confirm that later on this year, or maybe in the next fiscal, we'll be reviewing the organics aspect. I'm hoping that we can make some changes in that area regarding climate change, but we'll see. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to ask the question, or that's just sort of a generalized statement?
Well, no, it's a generalized statement. Knowing that it's coming up for a renegotiation, that would probably be the more appropriate time to talk about potential changes. But just to, putting staff on notice that I will be asking lots of questions, as maybe others will as well, that I think we need to redo with the way we do organics. Putting it into a big truck and shipping it across to the mainland and having some organics factory deal with it over there and then possibly shipping it back via barge makes no sense to me. So I'm hoping we can come up with a better, cheaper, more effective way of doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Were there any other questions? Councillor Green?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just through you to Director Payne, just for clarification again for the public's awareness, this has nothing to do with our own transfer station and our own public works services and programs that we provide locally. This is outside that local service. Thank you.
Mr. Payne?
Through Your Worship, I don't believe the transfer station costs are included in the cost of this. It's simply the cost of solid waste pickup and disposal and organics pickup and disposal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Any other questions or comments at this time? All right, so we have first and second reading live on the table then. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Seeing none, it passes. Can I get moved third reading? Hands up. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. And can I get move adoption? Moved and seconded. Thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 8 on the agenda then. This is bylaw 4751, alternative tax collection scheme bylaw. Mr. Payne, back to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. The staff have drafted this bylaw as a result of council direction. This is some of the direction that came from council to mitigate the financial hardship that may occur as a result of COVID-19 to some of our citizens. This bylaw moves the tax due date from the statutory July 3rd date to August 4th, which makes the penalty date August 5th, and then a second 5% penalty date on October 2nd. Keep in mind, business class properties are not subject to penalty until October 1st. So pursuant to this bylaw, they would only incur a 5% penalty. I say only, I understand that can be difficult for some people, but they would not incur a full 10% between the two because we will not legislatively be able to apply a penalty until October.
Interesting. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Payne. Can I get moved first and second reading of this, then we can have discussion or questions? Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. The motion is live on the table then. Are there any questions of Mr. Payne? Not seeing any hands going up. Okay, then I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Can I get moved third reading? Moved and need a hand. Thank you. Seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. And can I get move adoption? Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Again, don't normally do discussion on adoption, but just because of the awkwardness here, I thought I would just open it up. Any other questions, comments before I call it? None. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. And item number 9 and last item before adjournment is bylaw 4757, revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw. Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. This bylaw is a precautionary measure that staff are recommending in the case where property tax revenue and cash flow becomes a concern. Staff are confident that at least under current economic conditions that we have the cash flow resources to mind our current operations and capital expenditures as approved in the financial plan bylaw. However, this provides us with an extra level of safety in case we need to borrow. We would borrow from the Municipal Finance Authority, and we can borrow up to $18 million temporarily just to fund our operations, which would be paid back as soon as property tax and other revenue would come flowing in. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Again, by same process, can I just get a mover of first and second reading? Moved and seconded. Thank you. The motion is live on the table. Are there any questions or comments from council on this item? Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Appleton, then Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff. If we can just get some clarifications. The 45 million that is quoted in here, operating expenditures, that's the operating and 2020 capital projects expenditures, just for clarification?
I'll go to Mr. Payne here for clarification for the answer. Mr. Payne? Yeah, no, we'll give you a moment to go look. We've moved through these last few items pretty quickly, and you've been on the hook for all of them. So I think we're quite happy to let you take a minute to find the specifics.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the $45 million represents operating expenditures, including special projects. So those are not of a capital nature. And then we also have capital expenditures and debt servicing. Debt servicing is very low, but capital expenditures are $12.1 million.
Okay. Thank you. You know, when we talked about the borrowing, now typically I think the MFA has a spring and fall borrowing streams. Has that process changed now with the pandemic going on and needs of municipalities changing? Is there any change to when that might be done?
Mr. Payne, is there any changes there?
Thank you, Your Worship. Not that I'm aware of, Councillor Patterson. I still believe it's a spring and fall. And one thing I would need to confirm is I believe those spring and fall borrowing refer to long-term borrowing, but not temporary borrowing. I think we could access these funds despite those timelines, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So it's something I would have to confirm.
That was going to be another question, so thank you for answering that. And do we have any idea of what the MFA's projected or confirmed rates are based on short-term borrowing?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm trying to recall because MFA recently went out with their, you know, they issued their own debt and they did tell us what it is, but it's very low. It's sub 2% for sure. I think could be just above 1%. Again, I'm sorry I can't answer specifically, but it's within that range.
Yeah, well, it's good to know no significant change there, and that they have funded, so that is good. Now, you talked about the repayment in here, about repayment on or before the 31st of December. Is that required under legislation, or is that schedule flexible, dependent on cash flow?
Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship, and excellent question. The province has indicated that they're actually going to change, at least temporarily, the legislation requiring us to repay it by December 31st. So that was one of the measures that the provincial government promised to us. I haven't seen it in the form of legislation yet, which is why I've got that due date in our bylaw. But I imagine that their legislation would supersede our bylaw, allowing us to repay after December 31st, should it be needed.
Okay. And so this is relatively a new step, probably not the first time that it's been done in Oak Bay, but it probably has not been initiated for quite some period of time, and most municipalities are going through that. But what will be the process on decision making around that, on the when, how, amounts, and what are the roles in determining that?
Mr. Payne?
Through your worship, if this bylaw is adopted by council, it really empowers me to take care of the logistics. So there's an application form that I have to go through with the Municipal Finance Authority. Obviously, it requires a bunch of cash flow projections that I need to prepare. And then, I need to ensure that those are paid back accordingly. So at this moment, there's no contemplated governance role in that process except for reporting.
And one last question on that, Mayor, through you two staff, if I could. And so if you could just perhaps Mr. Payne clarify for us, is that something that you would be looking at as doing as a lump sum borrowing? Or is it something that you would stagger the borrowing on a monthly basis going forward, depending on the cash flows? And is that even an option for us to consider?
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, my understanding is that you could borrow much like, let's say, a line of credit. So it's highly dependent on the situation and the cash flow projections that I prepare at that time. Obviously, the most advantageous process for the district would be to borrow as little as possible so that we're not subject to the debt servicing costs. So that would be my intention.
And hopefully it will not come to this, but again, Mayor, if we could clarify, for repayment of the loan, which is to help with the cash flow, and it would be based, of course, on not receiving the taxation revenues from residents and businesses in the district. And so if the repayments have to be made, then how do we recover on behalf of the balance of the residents who pay their taxes? So would that then just be an outstanding amount that would be borne by the rest of the tax base in the community until such time as those accounts were collected through whatever means is available, either through the municipality or the tax assessment department?
Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship. Property taxes happens to be one of the strongest asset class when it comes to recoveries. And that's because the Local Government Act permits us to proceed to tax sale. It actually directs us to proceed to tax sale if property taxes haven't been paid after 2.5 years from when they were levied. So, absent of a very large macroeconomic event, almost all taxes are recoverable, and no local government likes to go the tax sale route. In my experience, it's never property has never fully gone through the tax sale and been sold for recovery of taxes. It's just a hammer at the end of the day. One interesting point that I will make here is that the provincial government has indicated again that they will empower council to forego the tax sale this year. So if council feels that we don't want to proceed with tax sale this year, all of those properties that would have been sold at tax sale can be moved a year from now. So that's just a related point that I thought I would make.
Well, and hopefully it won't come to that, but then in fact it could. Would that mean that the taxes would have to be borne by the rest of the residents in 2020? What would be the mechanism for doing that? Since we've already established a tax rate going forward, so in 2021 we would adjust if we didn't collect all the revenues, we would make an adjustment to the 2021 taxes to recover that temporarily, waiting for revenue collection, however that is triggered.
Through your worship, what you're describing, Councillor Patterson, is more of a cash flow issue. So if we don't recover $100,000 in taxes this year, we will earn that revenue. So that revenue does not need to be borne by other taxpayers. It's just a cash flow issue. In fact, for people who don't pay their taxes, well, they get hit with a pretty hefty tax penalty. So that's more revenue for everyone else. And when they go to tax sale, there's another big penalty that they have to pay, which is really revenue for the other taxpayers. So I I'd make the opposite argument. I would say if a lot of people didn't pay their taxes, we would actually have more revenue.
But not a scenario we want to see happen, obviously.
No, thank you for that clarification. It's a question that residents have put forward to me. I didn't have the answer, so grateful to Mr. Payne for providing that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have Councillor Appleton and then Councillor Zelka. Councillor Braithwaite.
Through you to staff, just with regards to the actual number, the $18 million being set as the number here. I think it might just be beneficial if I could request of the Director of Finance just to explain maybe in a little bit more simple language about how numbers derived. I see in the bylaw itself that it talks about how it would be calculated, but just for the edification of members of the public, whether we could sort of have an explanation of how that number is derived and why that number as compared to any other particular number as it pertains to our overall revenue.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Payne?
Yes, and thank you for the question, Councillor Appleton. I believe the community charter really empowers us to, if we want to adopt a revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw before taxes are levied, we can collect up to approximately 75% of what last year's taxes were. Now, the community charter, it doesn't say whether that includes other taxing authorities. So our entire tax base last year would have been, $45 million in total. But I just took the more conservative approach to ensure that I was within the legislation. And last year's municipal taxes were approximately $24 million. Multiply that by 17 or by 75%, that's how you arrive at 18 million. So we most likely could have put a higher number in the bylaw, but that's how I arrived at that number.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. And yeah, given that we're anticipating $0 being needed, that's obviously a significant buffer of things there. Councillor Zelka, then Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Director of Finance. I'm so pleased to see that Section 177 in the Community Charter, the revenue for anticipation borrowing is being used, especially in this pandemic times. It's so rare that we get a chance to talk in a 5-year segment or in a 5-year perspective. So I'll take advantage of this moment in time to ask whether there's any plans in the next 5 years in some of the financial planning that you may be casting forward in your mandate. Is there any anticipation of looking at sections 178 for short-term capital borrowing with respect to the fact that it only needs the approval of the MFA inspector, and we can borrow for up to 5 years without having to return the money? And I'm thinking, for example, of the uplands or of some other larger multi-year capital projects that we need to move forward on. And then a follow-up question we'll be asking about later sections that we could possibly use as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. There are many tools available to us financially for the MFA. Mr. Payne, do you want to answer the one on specific to the 5-year capital?
Yes, thank you, through your worship. Through to Councillor Zelka, the 5-year financial plan as adopted today doesn't anticipate short-term capital borrowing. It certainly anticipates long-term capital borrowing, and Carnarvon Park building is what comes to mind for that. The approach which council can absolutely vary with his discretion undertaken by the finance department right now has been to finance new capital services with debt and try to replace our existing infrastructure with reserves. So that's how we delineated there. The short-term capital allows us to borrow very short-term without elector assent, but it also requires us to pay it back in 5 years. So for a piece of capital that has a useful life that far exceeds that, it can be quite a heavy debt burden if we were to finance it all with short-term capital. So it wouldn't be practical for entirely funding Carnarvon Park, for instance. It's much more affordable to the taxpayer now if we spread that cost over 30 years as opposed to 5 years. So that's the reason why we've anticipated long-term borrowing for that building and not short-term.
Thank you, Mr. Payne.
Thank you. If I may follow up.
Yes.
Thank you. I much appreciate the response on that. I do notice that later sections of the community charter, like 180, talks about how elector approval is required only for some of the loan authorization bylaws. Can I read between the lines and ask, are you, with respect to long-term financial borrowing, are you anticipating bringing forward a bylaw, either with or without, one that either may or may not need electoral approval?
Mr. Payne, I'm not sure you can entirely say that yet, but perhaps in general terms you can.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the elector assent is not required under some very specific type of capital improvements. Carnarvon Park wouldn't fall under that. However, there is a regulation that exists outside of the community charter that complements the community charter that says, okay, if your debt servicing levels are at a low enough point, you don't have to get electoral assent. I haven't done the test to determine if we're at that low point. Our debt servicing is very low. It's something that you can know for sure. It's $146,000 for principal and double that for interest. So maybe $300,000. That's a very low debt servicing load for the size of our tax revenue. So we might be eligible for long-term borrowing without elector assent.
Final point, if I may.
Go ahead.
Again, thank you for this opportunity to talk in a 5-year segment, something that we may at one point shift over to an audit or a finance committee, but here we are today doing sort of finance committee kind of stuff. I very much appreciate the suggestion. I do note that very shortly the debt for building the B Street facility for the Oak Bay Rec Center will be fully paid off. Making our numbers even look better with respect to the even less debt that we'll be carrying. So with respect to taking advantage of this terrible time, trying to make the best of it, and with the interest rates being so low, I do appreciate the fact that from a going forward perspective, with a 5-year perspective, that you may be looking at more in the area of borrowing. And possibly bringing forward a full-throated loan authorization bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, to Mr. Payne. I just wanted to reiterate something I think I heard on our last meeting, which was around how the MFA will determine who gets the funding. Is it going to be on a first come, first serve, or a need, or are they limiting the amount that different municipalities can borrow so that there's enough for all? So just a general question in that regard.
Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. And the Municipal Finance Authority and how they prioritize short-term borrowing requests or temporary borrowing requests, there's nothing official there. It's all just through discussions. Early indications is they believe they'll be able to fulfill all the requests that will be forthcoming this year. They certainly have analyzed, well, what if we get more than we think we can handle? How will we prioritize that? And some of the discussion has been around municipalities who themselves have decided to defer tax revenue to a later date, therefore creating their own cash flow problems, may not get the same priority as a municipality who had no opportunity and really is just subject to the market. The province since then has alleviated a lot of this by telling municipalities that they don't have to pay their school taxes until the end of the year. So that frees up a lot of cash flow, which is a reason why, it's one of the reasons why the Municipal Finance Authority has said, we think we're going to be able to fulfill all requests without trouble at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Any other questions at this time? Seeing none, we just have we have first and second reading live on the floor then, so I'm happy to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, then we have moved third reading. It's moved and seconded. Thank you very much. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. And for someone to move adoption. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. That concludes our meeting for today. Thank you everybody for watching and for participating, staff and council. And we will meet again reasonably soon as council. I just need a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Amazing. All right. Pleasure seeing you all like this in little squares, and hopefully we'll see you in person again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.